Welcome to Visa Spotlight, a podcast by Visa that shines a light on the most exciting developments in the payments landscape right now, while also giving you a glimpse into what the future holds for us all.
Hello and welcome to Visa Spotlights. I'm your host, Dan Baxter, and in today's episode, we're going to explore the evolution of the Visa brand and also look at consumer expectations and how they're changing and what they want from brands and companies. We'll also be looking at how Visa is connecting with Gen Z, and we'll explore Visa's current partnership with Mo Salah. Joining me today is Visa's Chief Marketing Officer for the Central Europe, Middle East and Africa region, Tarek Abdalla. Tarek, welcome and thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Dan.
Tarek, perhaps we could start relatively broad. Visa is obviously one of the most global companies operating in almost 200 countries around the world. How have you seen the evolution of the Visa brand over the last few years and decades?
Well, I think we're privileged and honored to be one of the most trusted brands in financial services, and in fact across any brand in any category. And I think that stems from the fulfillment of a promise over many, many years to our clients, to our consumers, and to the ecosystem, to the payment ecosystem as a whole. We're also a brand that has always been at the intersection of culture and commerce. And by culture, I mean understanding the current moment and what is top of mind and what is the consumer zeitgeist. And then obviously commerce, because we operate in the commerce space, in the payment space. So if you look back to the 60s, it was an era of scientific accomplishment. The zeitgeist was all about science. Then digital payments, in fact, was a completely new innovation. And so our line back then, or the message that it was our line, but it was also the message that we conveyed, obviously, was think of it as money. Because we really wanted to demystify this technology that we're telling, that you no longer have to take wads of cash somewhere. You take a physical piece of plastic and you give it to someone. And then that someone has to believe that they're going to get paid. And so think of it as money served that purpose and met that moment. If you fast forward a little bit to the 70s and 80s, you have this change in society, which was really fueled by the growth of the middle class. So as the middle class became much more able to unlock their dreams through financial access and financial inclusion, the moment was really all about that. And so our line, our interpretation of the role we play in commerce changed from think of it as money, because now they know it's money, to you can do it. And that was really the element or the push during that moment of time. And then in the 90s and the early 2000s was the experience economy. And so, travel expansion, people's ability to go around the world and pay around the world in much easier ways made us evolve our line to everywhere you want to be, which was really an expression of physically being everywhere you want to be, but then also everywhere you want to be emotionally and from a personal goal point of view. So we've always looked for that intersection, and we've always been inspired by what's happening in culture and bringing that into commerce.
Excellent. Well, what I think is fascinating is that there's obviously been enormous change in the world over the last 50 years since the first transaction over VisaNet took place, which is obviously a milestone we're celebrating this year. Yeah. And the brand has evolved hugely, but I think some of the core values have really remained the same. Another area that's changed enormously has been consumer expectations and what consumers are seeking from brands and companies who they trust and they spend money with. How do you think consumer expectations have sort of changed most recently? And what does that mean for companies like Visa, but other organizations moving forward?
Right. I think the consumer expectation has been shaped by technology and what technology has disrupted and changed in terms of how we view our relationship with brands and with companies. I think primarily we live in an age of you can perhaps call it instant gratification, right? When you think about the world of content, it used to be that you would watch a show and then you'd have to wait a week to watch the next episode, and you'd sit there itching, waiting for that Thursday night or Friday night to watch a second episode. Now you can watch an entire series, you can binge watch an entire series in one go. And that has changed people's expectations. People expect things to be more available immediately, and to not have to wait for them. You see delivery services that take 15 to 20 minutes now in some countries in CEMEA. So that's an example of an expectation change. Another expectation change is personalization. So it used to be that a clever salesperson would be able to figure out what it is that you want and try and personalize it for you on the fly. But now you have algorithms to do that. And the expectation that has changed is that people anticipate that the platforms that they work with, the retailers they buy from, the brands that they deal with, are only recommending them things that are actually relevant for them. In fact, personalized advertising, for example, is one of Gen Z's favorite features of the modern advertising ecosystem, right? Because they like to see ads that are relevant to them. And they understand the data requirements for that, but it's actually a very appealing thing because it's relevant. So personalization is important. The third is really around values and shared values. We sometimes assume incorrectly that the expectation is that for every company or every brand to be about sustainability or to be about racial justice. Yep. But what we know about Gen Z is that they expect the brand to be relevant to be relevant to a societal cause or to supporting the community in the space in which that brand operates, not necessarily to take a blanket cause and run with it because it's not believable.
Yes.
And the last thing is authenticity. So the authenticity that a brand expresses in its lingo, in how it deals with consumers, in funny replies on social media, in spontaneous moments that those brands create, is a big part of connecting with Gen Z because they do not want to deal with a big corporation. They would like to deal with a personality. And I think that authenticity really brings that personality out and creates that connection.
Interesting. So you just touched on both sides of the payments world, both consumers and merchants. And I think this obviously comes back to Visa's purpose around uplifting everyone everywhere by being the best way to pay and be paid. Amongst all of the change that we discussed, some of the elements have remained true for years and decades now. And one of the tenets that I think Visa was built on was this concept that anyone can make it, and that sort of success can be shared and prosperity. Prosperity is a platform for growth. What are some of your thoughts in terms of what making it sort of means today?
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's also undergone a significant change, right? So when we think about young people today and what they have been through, if you think about from the financial crisis when Gen Z started to come of age or to understand the world around them, still young but understanding the world around them, and the impact that had on so many jobs and so many lives around the world, and then you follow that through an age of accelerated technology, accelerated connectivity, all the trends we talked about with personalization. And then the pandemic. They interpret the world in ways that are different to our generation, in the sense that it is actually not linear. It's a series of steps of progress that take them forward from A to Z. Those steps may be large, may be small. We may know the destination, but we also may not know the destination. And ultimately, the joy of progress is the ultimate expression of making it. Now, if you compare that to the past, making it meant a status symbol, right? A job, a title, a car, a home. Those were the symbols of making it. Today, those symbols have changed. And in fact, in the payments world, experiences used to be a symbol of making it. You used to save up for a year so that you could, go to that location or save up for a while to get to that restaurant. And I think what's changed now is that those experiences have become infinitely more accessible, right? So you can get on a plane for a couple of $100 and be somewhere else. And so that, although it's not accessible for everyone, it's significantly more accessible than it was before. And so holding back on things in order to save up and get that gratification later has changed. That process has changed. And really that comes into the world of payments in many ways. So if we're saying making it is a process, or the most important part of making it is the journey, then there are real implications on how they perceive payments. So, for example, a gym membership is not simply a gym membership. It's a vote for yourself, for who you want to become. And the role that the transaction plays in this has now become surprisingly elevated. So whereas before a transaction was a transaction, you don't necessarily think about it. We know that this generation thinks deeply about transactions because they represent progress and they represent steps forward.
Perhaps you could talk a little more on the importance of Gen Z and also ways in which we can sort of engage and connect with them in a meaningful way.
Yeah, absolutely. Our region would represent just under a third of global Gen Z. We represented only 20% of millennials. So you can see the increasing importance of Gen Z in our region, but also around the world. So many of the trends that we see young people pick up eventually become trends for an entire audience, not just young people. And you saw this with technology adoption, and you saw this in so many different contexts. The key features of Gen Z that we need to think about as brands, as companies, as businesses, the ones that we are very focused on. First of all, I think financial awareness and literacy is high. A large portion of Gen Z carry personal debt. As I indicated earlier, fulfilling those experiences in a less protracted way, in a nearer term way, obviously, that takes on or requires some level of financial support. So, adoption of technologies like BNPL or even personal debt is quite high. So they're very aware of the financial burden that they may take on in the future. So that's an important one. The second is that they're very entrepreneurial. We see a very large percentage of Gen Z, particularly in CEMEA, want to establish their own businesses, want their side hustles to become full-time, do a full-time job and a hobby on the side. And that's a very unique feature. Like it wasn't the case with previous generations who would only be focused on either an entrepreneur or an employee. So that's the second one. The third is their cultural pride. Again, you go back a few generations, there was one way of being cool. There was one pair of jeans, there was one pair of sneakers or one brand of sneakers, and that was it. That, everybody who could afford was, looked that way. And now what you're starting to see is the infusion of culture, local culture, because of that cultural pride with global culture, right? And you see that in music with the fusion of different genres of music, some local, some global. You see that in film with the sort of export of film genres from around the world that wouldn't normally export. And you see it in fashion, the combination of local dress with international dress and the fusion of that. So cultural pride is critical. And then there's their attitude and behavior towards content. So 70% of Gen Z in CEMEA are gamers. So gaming is a huge part of their life. They live their lives online anywhere from 4 to 8 hours a day. Sometimes you even see countries with higher numbers permanently connected. And so those are, I think, the factors that we need to consider. But when we turn those factors into principles, into terms of how we connect with Gen Z, and there's three things that we like to think about. The first is to share their values. What that means is to really truly understand that journey of progress and that journey of making it that I was talking about earlier, and really show that we understand that, show that we are connected to that journey and that we play a role in that journey, and that our values are consistent, right? So we also want them to make it. We also want to be there every step of the way in order to help them make it. So I think sharing their values. The second is meeting them in their context. And what that fundamentally means is that where they are, we are as well, as brands, as, and increasingly that's the world of digital and social and not the world of analog and offline. And so really being part of that journey and being there. And the last one, and this one's critical, I talked about authenticity earlier, is enabling their journey. And that means walking the talk. So we can talk as much as we like about making it, but if we're not actually putting practical ways in which Gen Z can make it and opening up those opportunities, then we're not really doing our part connecting with them. Examples of that would include the programs we do around women empowerment, like She's Next. That's an example of us living our values and living our principles. Another one would be a program we launched called Get Paid, which was really a way to connect successful content creators with aspiring content creators in ways that help them monetize their content online. And so that's another example. So really, you have to live and breathe what you're saying. It's no longer enough to have a fancy ad and put it out and make sure everyone sees it. You actually have to have evidence, because this is what this generation is looking for.
Absolutely. So you've just given some great background and a good overview of the current landscape. And you mentioned a couple of the programs that you have underway at the moment. I was wondering if we could spend a bit more time there looking at some of the campaigns and some of the initiatives that have recently been introduced. We obviously recently announced a partnership with Mo Salah, the renowned global icon and footballer. Perhaps you could give a bit more of an overview of that partnership and how that really sort of fits in with some of the themes that you were just talking to.
Yeah, with Mo Salah, it's always the most obvious way to look at it is that he's an incredibly successful athlete from our region who's reached the pinnacle of football, and so represents achievement. But it's a lot more nuanced than that. We look at it as the consistency between the story that we believe is so critical for Gen Z, that story of progress, then the small steps and making it, and how consistent that story is with Mo Salah's story. So when you come from an environment that isn't typically associated with success in football, so a small village in Egypt, and then you make it through the agony and the pain and the commitment, and we talk about the number of buses that he used to take, the number of training training events that he had to do, to sort of graduating into professional football, to graduating into international football, to graduating to Liverpool, like all of these steps. And what is involved in each of those steps is the part that really inspires us. And we feel like he embodies that in a way that is so powerful that it fits the brand and it fits the mission and the story that we want to tell so well.
Fantastic. And we're also just around sort of 70 days or so away from the Olympics.
Yes.
And we also have another fantastic partnership with the Visa Cash App Red Bull Formula One team,
yes,
which we introduced a few months ago and is sort of early in the F1 season here. Could you give a bit more context in terms of how we're going to be showing up at the Olympics and also how we're partnering in Formula One?
So, I mean, in the same vein, in the same spirit that when we were talking about Mo Salah, it's really critical that when we think about the journey of an Olympian, that the vast majority of Olympians work exceptionally hard to get to the Olympics, but the vast majority leave without a medal. And so we're not about the medals and the winning and the three on the podium. We're about every Olympian's journey and the steps that they take that get them to participate in an event of this magnitude. So our Team Visa programs, where we work closely with Olympians from around the world, are actually entirely designed around supporting their journey as they prepare themselves for the Olympics. And we're very inspired by some of the examples that we have from our region, and we're really excited to see them there. But it's really a story of progress. It's a story of steps, and it's a story of determination, and that's the part that we want to play a role in. With F1, it's a similar story as well. You might look at a race as a very linear exercise. You start, and whoever drives fastest wins. But the reality of the detail of a race, Daniel Ricciardo talked about this with Frank Cooper, our CMO, in the launch event of this partnership, and he said every race is a series of small races, which is very true, because if you go into the detail of what it takes to overtake a car, we see it on screen, we think it's a simple maneuver. It's a process. It takes laps and laps and laps of thought, and the same thing with a pit stop. It looks great, but then we have to think about the synchronization and the effort and the practice and what is required to actually get a pit stop done in 2 seconds. Is really the part that inspires us so much. So that journey, that progress, those steps are really the reason where we see those properties as so incredibly valuable, and we value those partnerships so much in telling our story to the world.
And I love the fact there it's not just about the driver as well. It's about the hundreds of people behind the scenes that are all contributing,
yes,
and providing those small steps as well.
Absolutely.
So thank you, Tarek, so much for joining us today. Lots of great progress, lots of great opportunity, and lots of great plans in the works as well. So thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us today, and hope you've enjoyed the conversation with Tarek. If you'd like to know more about Visa's brand plans and any of the programs that we mentioned, please have a look in the description at the bottom of the podcast. Thank you very much, and see you next time.